This is the Deep Floor Econ Chat, and I'm Radical Liberation from St. Louis, Missouri.
I'm Mad Mercenary from Australia.
And we have a great topic this week, a very relevant topic. But we're going to start, as I like to do, with a few things here and there from other topics. I actually would like you to go first with one of the, what do we call them? Minis. Econ minis. I don't know, something like that. You do one first, sir.
Okay. First topic is the House in the United States passed a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill yesterday on the 1st of July.
Trillion.
Yeah, with
wow.
the T. 1.5 trillion to improve highways, bridges, dams, basically a huge FDR-style infrastructure bill.
Which, I don't know if you're going to get into this, but evidently across the pond, they're doing something similar, I'm told. And in fact, have even brought up like New Deal, the New Deal term or something like that, I think, in the UK.
Yes, the Boris Johnson quote-unquote conservative government is invoking the mythical legend of the Great Depression and FDR, which is quite telling about the attitude that people think we are in.
Yeah,
because if you don't bring up the Great Depression unless you think you're headed for hard times.
I would like to note that someone suggested that our topic, the left in power, could be about the Tories, but we actually have something. appreciate the suggestion, but we actually have something slightly different in mind. Okay, done with that topic?
All good, all done.
Okay, then I wanted to mention someone I think you should pay attention to. There is a guy named Per. I don't know how to say these Scandinavian names. P-E-R. Per Byland, I'm going to say. And he is great. Some kind of association with the Mises Institute, I guess. He's Austrian. Anyway, what I want to tell, my tip to you, even as many of us leave for Parler, my tip to you is follow Per on Twitter until we can convince him to do the great stuff he does on Parler. He does these threads. Here's one, for example. I'll just read the first tweet out in case you're not looking at the screen. We have the wrong intuitions about the economy. We tend to assume it is about engineering rather than entrepreneurship. This is fundamentally mistaken. Economists typically make that same mistake and therefore focus their modeling on the wrong thing. If it is about engineering, it's about efficiency, technology, resources, but it's not. It's about value. And then he goes on from there. So they're essentially little, I don't know what to call them, little essays on various topics in economic theory and so forth. Really accessible. He just does Twitter threads. And they're just classic. I mean, each time he does one of these Twitter threads, it's like, rub your hands together. This is going to be good stuff. So in fact, let me share his profile. It's the best way to do this. Share his profile right there in the chat for those who want to take advantage. Your next topic, sir.
My next topic, perhaps, let me just share my screen because we all know we have to have our bi-weekly balance sheet update for the Fed. Does everyone see that?
It's creeping over the internet. Let's see here. It says play. Oh, okay. Yep, should be there. Go ahead.
Should be there.
Yep.
We are actually going down in the balance sheet, which is quite interesting. It's not the dramatic rise that we saw at the beginning of the year, but it's a relatively significant drop of about $94 billion. Which
remind us that
2017, 2018 would have been amazing.
That dramatic jump there, when does that start? It's a little hard to see we have sort of a fuzzy view of this.
That starts precisely on Wednesday, February 26th, 2020.
Okay, so right, so that's February 26th, so
Can you guys see
March,
that little
April,
marker?
May, June. So that's about 4 months ago. You just see it's climbing up the mountain, shooting to the stars, and then suddenly it comes back down a little, relative to how big it jumped, little. And you haven't
Yes.
seen any word on
Hmm.
why that is yet, right, Medmer?
I haven't seen any talk about that as far as major news sources. Um, it's been very interesting, the silence on that.
Okay, so
Anyway,
keep an eye on
nice
that.
little tidbit.
Probably not going to drop back to where it was in February over the next month or two. That's my little prediction I'll make, but I could be wrong. Okay, next topic. I wanted to highlight an article from the Mises Institute. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is good introductory material can be difficult sometimes. If you want to read a massive tome, we got you covered. George Reisman, Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard. You could spend the next year or two just reading those 3 books easily, if not longer than that. But what if you just want to, introduce to someone who's just getting interested, or you yourself would like to just kind of get a quick idea of, what is Austrian economics, for example. George Pickering wrote this article basically in praise of Rothbard's article, The Forgotten Greatness of Rothbard's Preface to Theory and History. So Mises had a book later in his life, Theory and History. It was republished by the Mises Institute after Mises's death with a preface by Rothbard. And what George points out here, since it's a preface to a book, and I don't know that it was necessarily published as a standalone piece, he says it's really brilliant what Rothbard does here. It's not, in the preface is not intending to introduce any new ideas. What it does is summarize the Austrian approach very briefly and quickly and thoroughly. And he says this is the one thing I wanted to highlight from this, and then I'll just share the link and recommend it to you, George's article, and then the preface itself. The final sentence of Rothbard's preface to Theory and History contains what may as well have been its title. Without praxeology, no economics can be truly Austrian. If you don't understand what that sentence means, then I recommend you read George and Murray. Okay, go ahead. You've got one more, right? Matt Merck? Okay, not hearing Mad Merck. Mad Merck, you there? I'm not hearing you. Okay, then I'll cover my next one, and hopefully Mad Merck will be back with us shortly. In fact, let me just message him. Okay, I am hoping he will get that sorted. Okay, next one I wanted to highlight is an article from Mises.org, but it's on a topic that we've touched on in the past. Let me get this up. Here we go. And I actually pulled out several points on this. Sorry, it gets distracting when there's something going wrong. Okay. So by Claudio Grass, just published this week, the COVID crisis supercharged the war on cash. So the old argument for the war on cash is used by terrorists, money launderers, and criminals. You might have heard that yourself. The new one in recent months was you can catch COVID through cash. Also, what we saw with the coronavirus was a transition to online shopping. And then there was a bigger push as part of all this. He says a highlight came in May when the World Economic Forum published an article in its global agenda strongly supporting the mass adoption of digital payments for the sake of public health. Mad Merc, can you look unmuted? Can I hear you now?
I am here.
There we go. Okay, I couldn't hear you for a while. Anyway, I'm going to keep on going with this. Get ready for this part. I think you'll find this interesting. In fact, let me actually scroll to this bit a little bit. Yeah, in the section called Fiat Money 2.0, I think your ears might prick up. He says he says China, they're saying we should be doing what China's doing. And he says, so let's look at what China's doing in this area. A new digital yuan was introduced. This new fiat currency, which has been in development for over 5 years, was rolled out in April in 4 Chinese cities, with a plan for national adoption soon so that it eventually replaces the physical legal tender. Okay, so let's be clear. It's digital and it's fiat, all right? In fact, he compares it to the Facebook Libra thing. He says it's really quite similar. According to China's state media, People's Daily, the new currency is meant to simplify domestic transactions and trade, but it will also facilitate and ease cross-border transactions. The implication is clear. It is yet another attempt to challenge the global dominance of the US dollar after the Belt and Road Initiative failed to really move the needle as the Chinese state had hoped. And then just one more detail I wanted to throw in relative to crypto stuff, which is interesting to a lot of our audience. China's government banned initial coin offerings, ICOs, and placed great burdens on cryptocurrencies and crypto investors, making it very hard to operate in the country, thereby dismantling the threat of potential competition from the private sector and clearing the way for its own digital coin. So anyway, don't want to spend a bunch of time on this, but I thought this was extremely interesting. Crisis is always an opportunity, right, for some, and looks like a number of actors here, the Chinese government and others, are moving against cash and trying to move towards something, shall we say, more trackable, because as the article points out, this Chinese fiat digital currency is not going to be the sort of thing that is peer-to-peer and anonymous in the manner of Bitcoin. It's going to be very trackable what you do with this fiat digital currency. So any comments on that, Medmerk? Otherwise, feel free to go on to your topic.
Yeah, the Chinese have used digital currency, maybe not the yuan, but they've used digital transactions for a while now. They use I forget what the app's called. It starts with a W, but basically you just have a little RFF scanner, a little, you know what that, what are they called? The thing that Snapchat uses in a lot of different apps. You basically just scan it with your phone, and it's like a little code. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of it. Anyway, they take that code. That code is verified to a business, and then you just can pay online through cash. Kind of like a very early version of Touch and Pay. That's been used in China for years now, so this is just another logical step for the Chinese state to do.
Yep. Very, very interesting developments. Okay, and I think you had one more item, right?
Two more. I found one more while you were talking. So Germany, I didn't catch this, sorry, and I should have caught this about 2 weeks ago. But Germany on the 11th of June announced a another $1.5 trillion stimulus package to fight COVID.
Okay. So Germany, UK, and US have all announced massive, I don't know what to call it, New Deal type of things, right?
Yes. But considering the size of Germany's economy in comparison to the United States, that 1.5 trillion is a lot more impactful,
Right.
both good and bad.
What could possibly go wrong? Pump it
What
up.
could possibly
Pump
go
it
wrong?
up. Okay, and you had one more?
I had one more. Could you just go to the private chat and post this
Yeah.
YouTube link into the live comments? Because unfortunately, whenever I try to do that, it just goes haywire, which is unfortunate.
So there's a YouTube link.
Yes.
All right. So I should stop it playing. Or I'm sorry, am I going to be playing something?
No. You don't have to play it. It's just a
Just show
link
it.
so everyone knows that the.
Yeah, I saw this headline, but I didn't know what to make of it. Please spell it out. PM, Prime Minister of Australia, warns Australians to prepare for a more dangerous, more disorderly world.
Right. So the full quote is a more poor, a more dangerous, and a more disorderly world.
Mm.
Basically, the Australian PM announced that there would be a $270 billion increase in the military budget, which is significant, considering that the last military budget was only $80 billion.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry, it's gonna add 270 or it's gonna go up to 270?
Sorry, it's over a period of time, so it's not all at once.
Okay.
But it's an additional funding of $270 billion for a more disorderly world. So you don't do that for no reason, especially if.
What do you conclude?
I conclude that Scott Morrison has made the accurate assessment that we are entering into a time where military force is going to be more vital and military strength is going to be more vital.
Interesting. Yeah, and where's he coming from? Is he conservative, left? How would you characterize him?
The political system here is a little bit interesting. So the conservative faction is a coalition government between the National Party and the Liberal Party. He's a part of the Liberal Party wing of the Liberal National Party.
Okay.
So his side of the party. The Liberals are the city business interests, so the economic side. The Nationals are the country sort of nationalist party that looks after country interests, and then Labour is just the left-wing party. He's also a right-wing Keynesian or a left-wing monetarist, however you want to describe that.
Yeah.
So he does believe in fiscal spending, and the government needs to get involved in everything.
So that distinction, the distinction we've made between being pro-market process and pro-business, he might, it's fair to say, be on the pro-business side of that divide.
Right, but he sees he also believes in low regulation. So he believes in the stimulus, but he also believes in low regulation, which is interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a mixed bag.
Okay, thank you. And I have shared that link to the chat because I think streams should be footnoted, but that's just me. Okay. All right. So all done with our short items. Wow, that used a lot of time, actually. Okay, well, that's fine because I'm not going to have a ton of material. I could have a ton of material on this topic. Not going to have a ton of material on this topic, but I did want to start by introducing something that made a big impression on me, or I should say it's summarized in a cinematic moment. Something that I think is so key. So let's see, how do I share this? Here we go, yeah. So this is a still from the movie by one of my favorite filmmakers, Terry Gilliam, previously of Monty Python, but went on to make a lot of great films. His film called The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. And in this scene, I should know that actor's name. He starred in Brazil. Anyway, in this scene, he plays essentially a Robespierre, a French revolutionary type figure. And he really dislikes Munchausen, who represents romance and magic and things like that. And he is a man of reason. And so he decides to assassinate Munchausen.
Very
what I
reasonable.
wish, yeah, what I wish I could show you, this is the scene right before he shoots Munchausen, who does indeed die, at least for the moment. He shoots Munchausen, and then this statue that we're getting a nice shot of, this statue of death, comes to life. And the reason I wanted to bring up this scene is for the expression on the Robespierre character's face as he shoots Munchausen, and much darker and deeper and evil forces are released by his act of violence. He has this look of both complete shock and surprise and terror. And that, in a few seconds of film, Gilliam summarized the history of the revolutionary left. They open a Pandora's box of destruction, and then they're sort of shocked by what comes out. It's funny, this topic that we're talking about, other people must have been thinking along similar lines because, I guess they just pushed it. This is not a new article. This is an old article. This article is from 5 years ago, but I still would like to highlight it. Where is it? Sorry. There we go. I see. Revolutions eat their parents. And in this, he gives just a quick overview of the pattern, which is that the, how do you put it? The idealistic people, the people who the revolution was going to be for, the oppressed, the workers, the whatever, they're the first up against the wall when the revolution takes power. And so he talks about that pattern. He talks about Che Guevara gleefully and personally executing homosexuals whom he detested, and Mao boasting of burying 46,000 scholars alive, meaning sending them to the camps, and so forth. So he describes this pattern of the revolution eating its parents, playing off of the old saying, the revolutions eat their children. So I thought that was an interesting pattern. I want to briefly comment on this term, the left. Here, let me give you that link. It's a good one. And close a bunch of tabs so that I'm, okay. Briefly comment on this term, the left, and then get into the historical episode. So the way we use the left is not a terrible use of the term if you know its origins. The origins of left and right come from the, I'm sorry, I'm not going to use the Parliament or whatever. I'm not using the right term. After the French Revolution, where they sat based on their affiliate party leanings or whatever, they sat either to the left or the right of the assembly. That's what it was, the assembly. On the right were the people who were, advocates of the French Revolution. But they basically thought that, hey, we've done it. We got rid of the old order. We executed the king. We put the priests in their place. This is great. So basically, they wanted to consolidate the revolution. See if this feels like you see parallels to our current right and left. So the right of the assembly wanted to consolidate the revolutionary gains that had been made. But the left felt that the gains that the revolution had made were not enough, and they wanted to go further. So the left, I sometimes talk about the revolutionary left. If you understand the origins of that term, that's what the left meant from the beginning. It's the revolutionary ones of the revolution, the ones who really believe in perpetual radical revolution. They want to take it further and more extreme. So I don't think it's an unfair way to talk about the left. Having said that, if you think of the world as, the natural state of things would be half the people would be sort of left and half the people would be right, then that use of the term left is terrible because it really refers to a small number of very extreme characters. It does not refer to half the population. It refers to some single-digit percentage of activists and really ideologically committed folks who are pushing for radical, typically like socialist change, right? Okay, so before getting into the bigger episodes that we probably all have heard of, I want to mention something more obscure, which is Munster. I'm probably not saying that right. Munster, Germany. There's a great section in Rothbard's History of Economic Thought, Austrian Perspective on the History of Economic Thought, mouthful of a title, where he talks about Messianic communism and the Protestant Reformation. And there's this episode about Munster that is particularly interesting. I'm not going to go into great depth, but I just wanted to share the link. You would have to jump down to the section called Totalitarian Communism in Munster to see what I'm talking about. In it, he describes the takeover of a city by these Christians, I guess, or they seem to start out as some variant or radical variant of Reformed Christians. But then things got weirder and weirder and weirder until people were having to share their wives and there was polygamy, and they were being forced to, if they had been married to people who weren't part of like this cult, then they had to be married to someone who was. And so that meant that there were more men than women, or more women than men. So every man was married to like 3 or 4 women. And as Rothbard summarizes, within the space of only a few months, a rigid Puritanism had been transmuted into a regime of compulsory promiscuity. It's just a fascinating episode. It doesn't take long to read about it. I recommend it to you. What may also be of interest is that Munster was something that, say, someone like Karl Marx knew about, and he looked back to some degree as a forerunner of what he wanted with communism. And a lot of people died, and anyway, it was a big mess. So I think that's interesting. Let's talk then about really the beginning of the modern political world as we know it now, where we talk about the left and we mean the French Revolutionary left in essence, the current inheritors of the French Revolutionary left. And that's the French Revolution, of course. I read a book that I do want to highlight, in fact, by a fellow named Francois Furet, and we'll hear about him again in a bit. He wrote a book on the French Revolution called The French Revolution 1770 to 1814. This is actually part 1 of that, but anyway, I think I've read at least the part 1. And what can we say about the French Revolution? Well,
horrible,
there were a lot of
and full of death.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of aspects to it. There was an overthrow of the rulers. The king was actually executed eventually. At first, he was imprisoned, and then he was executed. And then and others too, I think. And then they started having the Reign of Terror, which I had forgotten as I was reviewing real quick for this. The Reign of Terror actually killed 300,000 people, so it wasn't just a few nobles. I doubt France had 300,000 aristocrats, maybe, but it was the 300,000 was not just aristocrats. In fact, it was mostly middle and lower class people that were executed by the revolutionary regime. But what's interesting is that Robespierre actually, that was far short of the goal he really wanted. He wanted to kill 50 million so-called useless eaters. The video I was watching talked about him being influenced by Malthus and being concerned about overpopulation. So he was going to fix it by fix the hunger problem by working on the demand side, shall we say, reducing demand by killing a lot of people who would need to be fed. So right away, you see the left in power, the revolutionary left in power, as murderous on a large scale. Not the scale that we'll see as we move forward in history, but quite a large scale for the time, I think.
Perhaps I can add here something.
Shocking. Please.
So during the French Revolution, the countryside, where a lot of the peasants who grew the food, and not the city peasants, they rose up in a counter-revolution against the French Revolution who overthrew the king. And this is simply because they didn't feel the disparity that the city peasants did. That really does actually speak to modern times, how it's mostly the cities and these areas with high populations are rising up, and it's not the country that's rising up. In fact, the country is very content and is very, everyone works together, well, to the larger degree than in the cities. So there's a parallel there to modern day, but after these places rose up in a counter-revolution, a lot of these areas were massacred. I mean, there's a story of how a French general, I forget his name, took the inhabitants of one town, made them make boats, tied them to the boats, and then set them on fire and sunk them in the middle of the ocean. He was later charged as the war criminal. Just
men, women,
absolutely
and children.
horrible. Men, women, and children, not just the men. And then when, after the productive peasants, who actually grew the food, knew how to grow the food, were killed, and the aristocrats who, very much like in Zimbabwe, knew the actual how to lay out the fields and how to actually run the estate and manage all. They actually had the knowledge and how to do that with the finances. When they were killed as well, and the people who made the food were killed, then food prices in the cities shot up. And anyone who complained about food prices or the quality of the food, they were also killed by the revolution. So it's just endless death spiral of, if you complain, you're dead. If you rebel, you're dead. If you have any knowledge beforehand, you're dead. It's this horrible series of events.
Right, and in particular, you actually went right into what I was going to talk about, which is the Vendée, and that's the area of France in particular that rebelled, with priests leading them, because they wanted to preserve Catholicism, and I'll talk about that in a moment, as well as, of course, they were unhappy with all the other changes being made. And so that was the counter-revolution. The Vendée Rebellion was the counter-revolution. And then putting it down, the revolution put it down, and that's sometimes considered the first modern genocide, the massacre of the Vendée. So
quite, if you're gonna read about that sort of stuff, have a stiff drink beforehand, because it's quite sobering.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's another. So I gave a hint there. There's another theme that we see right away in the French Revolution. In fact, it's hard to say what exactly is novel with what happens later. It just keeps happening, but it seems like all the seeds are there in the French Revolution. We see everything that we're going to see play out on a larger scale. It all happens in the French Revolution, and one of those things is an attack on religion. They literally took a statue of a goddess, which they called Reason, the goddess of reason, and they paraded her and put her into, and my mind just went blank, the church that burned, Notre Dame. Yeah, they put her in Notre Dame.
It became the temple
up on the
of
altar, and it became the temple of reason. That's right. They literally were establishing a secular religion, which is funny because I just saw Academic Agent on Twitter saying, could we just have kind of like morals, but without God? And I'm like, have you heard of the Church of Reason? It's been tried.
More accurately to be described as the cult of reason.
The cult of reason.
And Robespierre took this to the nth degree and basically said, I am a living demigod, and you will all bask in the greatness of my reason. and he became quite mad with power in this cult. And who was the man who was confined to a bath? Um,
To a
he had the
bath?
skin disease. Yes, he was a writer, and he wrote up lists for the revolution for people to kill. I forget the name of
Right.
the man.
You don't mean the one who wrote the book that Academic Agent's favorite movie is based on, do you? Marquis
Maybe
de Sade? Do you mean the
Marquis de
Marquis de
Sade.
Sade?
Marquis de Sade. When he was assassinated by a French peasant woman, he then became the first martyr, and his golden statue was thrown up everywhere, and he was Jean Paul Maté. That's it. He
Oh,
his he
so
was
I'm
thrown up
sorry, not
everywhere.
Marquis de Sade, but this other
No,
guy.
no, no.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
my mistake. My mistake.
Yep.
His statue was thrown up everywhere, and he was seen as the first martyr and his example. And since he was such a brutal man, and he wrote these just condemnations of people for the reasons that they should be killed, his style became quite popular during the revolution.
One last thing, I guess, to call out about the French Revolution in terms of seeing a pattern of behavior and a sequence of events that we would then see again and again is that things got pretty crazy and the revolution started killing its parents and its children and everybody else. Robespierre himself, who had sent many folks to the guillotine, I believe he himself was executed by guillotine. I don't know if you remember Mad Merc, but yeah, I thought so. So things got pretty crazy, and you're going to be shocked by what came next. A strong man rose up, a military figure, and established, in essence, a military dictatorship. Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself, right? Traditionally, the church would crown the king. He crowned himself, and he became, what was his actual title that he gave himself? Emperor, I think.
Originally, it was first consul, but he later upgraded to emperor.
Emperor, yeah. And so this revolution, which was liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? Liberty, equality, brotherhood. It was supposed to be about all these wonderful things that we hear from leftists, like I just saw a little clip of somebody who was like beating someone, and it homed in on his T-shirt, and it said, "We just need to love everyone," or something like that. So there's this rhetoric of love, and we just hate those intolerant people, and we're going to bring love and brotherhood. And instead, when they actually get in power, you get terror, and then eventually dictatorship. Usually a pretty harsh dictatorship. In fact, I don't know that Napoleon was quite that bad, at least in terms of domestic terror, compared to some of the socialist dictators we'll talk about shortly.
I wouldn't even call Napoleon a bad dictator in the sense of his domestic policy.
He was pretty rough, though, on anyone who opposed him outside of the borders of France, where he was going to bring the revolution to you, whether you wanted it or not. So the French Revolution actually became aggressive internationally.
Right. We see this with revolutions all the time, especially ones that arise from the left, because it's based around chaos without direction or restraint. People then long for order at any price.
Right.
And they will accept, and I think to some extent very justly, they will accept lack of democracy or lack of choice as long as order is restored.
Right.
Because people long for security and safety. And when you don't provide that, you no longer become legitimate in their eyes. And those who can provide that security and safety then become legitimate. And Napoleon provided that. Was he an iron-willed dictator? Absolutely. But did France go through a peaceful and strong period after he came to power? Yes. Internally peaceful, not
Internally
externally.
peaceful.
Yeah,
It was
obviously they
aggressive
were
elsewhere.
very aggressive on foreign policy.
Right. Okay, so that's probably as much as I wanted to highlight about the French Revolution. You brought in more than I thought you would. You were saying you didn't know anything. There you go.
Well, I wanted to bring up
Thanks
one
on
more
that, Mary.
thing,
Oh,
since we're
yeah.
an
Sorry,
economic
you
show.
actually had didn't you have a visual or something, or?
Just for the thumbnail, if you want to bring that up.
Oh, you mean just bring the thumbnail up?
Yeah. Now, since we're an economic show, I guess we should talk about some economics. When you kill the productive people in your nation becomes less productive, and the price of things are going to go up. Example, food in revolutionary France, and I don't mean Napoleonic France, I mean revolutionary France. When you promote people based on ideology rather than ability, then the quality will go down. Prices will go up unless you set price restrictions. But if you set price restrictions, you have to use force to get people to grow food because there's no incentive at low prices to grow food. Now, once you sort out your domestic policy and you actually start to promote people based on ability, do not have an international blockade on a certain country called the continental system. As Napoleon found out, prohibition doesn't work, and they wasted millions and millions and millions of French francs to try and prevent trade with all of Britain. Sorry, with all of the European countries and the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, they found out that it is impossible to stop smuggling. It is impossible to stop people trading, and you
But they were
can't.
probably pretty brutal about trying to make it happen.
Yes,
Right?
you can be very brutal about it, but it will still happen. I mean, I believe I remember Napoleon's brother or cousin complaining to him one time, "How are you expecting me to stop my citizens from feeding themselves?" And he basically looked them back and said, "With lead shot." So,
yeah.
since we're an economic show, prohibition doesn't work, price controls doesn't work, and don't kill the most productive people in your nation.
Right. Yeah. You're right. I was covering all these other aspects and didn't cover another theme, which is that when the left comes into power, they don't tend to be real pro free market types. The French Revolution would not really be an example of them trying to impose, like a Marxian socialism. But they did do plenty of stuff that was hostile to the free market, like price controls and so forth. And I think they screwed the money up too.
Yes, so they
Yeah,
had
inflation. Yeah,
a lot of money printing. And because
yeah,
France, now remember that France was, after the Louisiana fiasco, they had a big burst in their economy and they were going downhill into a recession. Revolution happens. Revolution just believes that you print money and everything will be okay, so they go into a depression. And then Napoleon comes around and enforces order, and they start to rein in the money printing. But then when Napoleon is starting to lose these wars, he just ramps money printing back up again. So it's not like Napoleon either had a strong foundation on what he believed to be right fiscal policy.
Okay, so I'd like to jump forward to the 20th century. Now, I think there were things going on with the left. I know there were things going on with the left during the 1800s, the 19th century. But it seems like actual seizures of the state apparatus, I don't know that that really happened. I can't think of anything. There was revolutionary activity. 1848 is a big year in Europe. And there's, of course, Marx and Engels publishing the Communist Manifesto that same year. so there's ideas, and it's growing in terms of leftist ideas are gaining more currency among intellectuals and things like that. But I don't think they really seize power anywhere. And I wanted us to focus this time on what happens when the left actually gets in power, because of course when they're not in power, they, can do all kinds of things like talk about how they love free speech or something. You have to see when they actually get in power, what actually happens, right? When they really have power. So I guess the next stop is the Black Book of Communism. I wanted to mention this as a major resource. And again, I thought Francois Furet was part of this. I'm sorry, I got mixed up. Just because there's French people, I can't tell my French people apart. Okay.
They all look the same.
So the Black Book of Communism, Crimes, Terror, Repression, is a joint work where various authors, mostly French, but it looks like some Polish and so forth, various continental authors have chapters focusing on various episodes of communism. Here's a quick summary of the death attributed to communism by these authors. They say, and I get different numbers whoever I look at, but they say about 25 million died in Russia during the Bolshevik and Stalinist eras, perhaps 65 million in China under Mao Zedong, 2 million in Cambodia. We'll talk more about that one, which is kind of interesting. And then millions more in Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. And I have to admit, I'm tend to know more about what happened in Europe, and I'm more hazy about the leftists in power in Africa and Latin America, for example. But I do know that Africa after World War II was, decolonizing and trying to find, the various African countries were trying to find their way. And what was in the air? Well, socialism, in essence. Left-wing economic ideas and so forth were pretty much in the air. And so that's what was often adopted, to the ruin of many African nations.
Right, and we've talked about this in a previous stream, but many of these African nations, after decolonization, many Asian nations as well, we can think of Malaysia and the attempted communist revolution there. Fortunately, the British and the Australians and New Zealanders put that down very quickly in a mini Vietnam. However, many of these African nations, simply because they wanted to be anti-colonialist and distinguish themselves from the former colonial power, went a total 180, and whatever was the enemy of the former colonial power must automatically be good in their eyes, which is obviously not right. What we're trying to say is that these areas could have worked. They could have been prosperous, but they just embraced socialism.
Yep.
And now it's Africa. Have a look at it. And only now that the Africans are adopting at least Keynesian economics, although many of them are still very socialist, they're actually starting to prosper a bit. Whether that prosperity lasts, I don't think so, but they're actually trying to improve.
Academic agent, I'm going to mess up the countries, but there's two countries that academic agent contrasts. Might be Botswana and Zimbabwe. Anyway, Zimbabwe,
Rhodesia.
Obviously, Zimbabwe is formerly Rhodesia, yeah. Zimbabwe.
No, it is Rhodesia.
Wait, what?
I don't recognize it as Zimbabwe. It's Rhodesia.
Sure. Anyway, Zimbabwe had a hyperinflation and a dictator and big mess. I think it's Botswana, very similar culturally and genetically for people who are into that kind of thing. Turnip Merchant agrees, it's Botswana. And Botswana is actually doing very well because they've adopted something more like, the market.
Yes.
I don't think they're like libertarian anarchists or anything, but they're at least not doing socialism, and they're actually doing quite well, I understand. So, Africa doesn't have to be the way it's been for much of the post-World War II era.
No,
Let me
and
bring up.
there were some
Go ahead.
there were some rather decent African countries for a while. So, for example, I've argued in the past, and it's a pretty controversial opinion, but South Africa was better under Keynesian apartheid, and it was Keynesian. Let's not mix that up. It wasn't great. It was still Keynesian economics, but they were better under a Keynesian apartheid on an economic basis than what they were under the current socialist regime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, South Africa. Right.
Yes,
yeah.
South Africa.
South Africa really went the wrong way in so many ways with the apartheid system, which was really a system that had to do with socialist labor unions and stuff like that. So it was really a mess from any market point of view. But you can always be worse, and it looks like South Africa is unfortunately going in quite a bad direction and doing quite poorly economically. So that's right. Tragic. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the killing. That's sort of my area.
Oh, good.
And this is from R.J. Rummel, and he puts it all here. There's also Germany. I'm not going to get into the whole, our Nazis leftist thing. For the purpose of this stream, I want to focus on the regimes that, at least at the time, would have been recognized as clearly left-wing. So, the USSR, here, unlike the Black Book of Communism, Rummel thinks the USSR killed many, many millions more, even than China, which is impressive because China has a lot more people to kill, right? But he puts them up over 60 million. And understand, when we're talking about these numbers, at least Rummel, he's not talking about soldiers dying in World War II, which, as you may know, was horrendous for the Soviet Union. But he's talking about civilians. So these are people who are being executed, dying in work camps, being worked to death, being starved to death with the state-engineered famine in the Ukraine, the Holodomor, that sort of thing. Then he shows China as 35 million murdered under the communists, and then this is not as well known. If it hadn't been for all the Nazis and commies, then the Chinese nationalists, the KMT, they would actually be considered the great mass murderers of the 20th century, because he credits them with about 10 million people killed, and most people don't even know that. Japan, as you may know, was quite brutal, not really left-wing, so we won't focus on that. And then, let's see. Yeah, now Cambodia is interesting. Notice this, I've been looking at focusing on the bars here. Look at the line chart. The line chart is the democide rate. Democide is Rummel's term. We would tend to use genocide, but genocide is technically like mass murder of an ethnic group, like you're targeting a certain ethnic group. As we know, left-wingers don't necessarily do that. They'll tend to target like an economic class, or as we saw with the French Revolution, basically everybody ends up on the guillotine, But so he uses democide. Demos just means the people. So it's the murder of the people, right? So just mass murder. It's a way to say mass murder. So the democide rate, that is how many people were killed per year. And Cambodia, you'll see, is far and away the outlier. So, Cambodia didn't have 65 million people to kill in the first place. It just didn't have that many people. But for the number of people, the size of the Cambodian population, the percentage of people that were killed by the Pol Pot and his folks was just off the charts, as you can see. So Cambodia is particularly interesting. It's interesting because of its targeting of intellectuals, down to even people who wore glasses would be targeted by the revolution. It's interesting because it drove people out of the cities and into the country, which had happened under under the Cultural Revolution in Mao's China. But this was much more extreme, and many people were sent out to work in the fields, and that's where we get the famous phrase, the killing fields, because they were not in the cities. They were driven out of the cities, literally at the point of a gun. Everybody's leaving the urban areas. We don't trust the urban areas. That's associated with, I don't know, degeneracy and intellectuals and capitalism and stuff like that. You're going to go work in the earth like good communist people. Cambodia is also interesting because it was meant to be like a refinement. They had studied in France, Pol Pot and some of the others. They had studied in France from the leftists there, and they had looked at the revolutions, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Chinese communists, and so forth. And they thought, okay, what did they do wrong? They didn't really achieve communism, not real socialism, right? That's exactly how Pol Pot thought when he looked back at it. That was not real. That's not what we want. So what do we really need to do? So Cambodia was meant to take it. Basically, they felt that everyone had been too half-hearted before them. That was essentially their conclusion. And that to really bring communism about, you had to be much more brutal. And so, as you can see from this democide rate, they achieved a level of brutality that actually no other regime possibly in the history of the world has achieved. The percentage of the population that was wiped out, it's a little hard to determine, but it could have been like 1/3 of the population or something like that. Like if you were in Cambodia at that time, you knew somebody who got killed.
Cambodia got so bad that communist Vietnam had to invade to stop the killing.
Yes, communist Vietnam were the relatively sane people to come in and stop the terror. Yeah, so that's really,
because
like in a way you could tell a story that starts with the French Revolution and the terror and Napoleon, and then bookend it with Cambodia and Vietnam essentially being the Napoleon who comes in and brings order in the midst of the revolutionary terror and chaos, right?
It's interesting, the parallels. So he was trained in France. Also, Ho Chi Minh was trained in France. He was originally a pastry chef, and then moved on to in university and became very heavily in Marxist views. The French export left-wing ideology in that sort of sense very consistently, and what we're seeing is that you take the ideas of the French Revolution, marry them with communism, you keep the violence that both communism endorses and the French Revolution committed, and you have a recipe for disaster. Now, what are we talking about here when it comes, because this is an economic show, so let's talk about the economics. It is putting ideology above reality. It is even when what you see with your own eyes and what you can tell by the statistics, ignoring that and just dogmatically believing in ideology rather than what is happening. So with the Khmer Rouge, there was the collectivization of the farms, and these weren't working because people weren't specialized or had no knowledge in how to work on a farm. So they all starved, and if they didn't work, they were sent off to the prisons, to where they were tortured and then killed. So there was no escape from this destruction. And what we're trying to say here is that you need to, when reality smacks in front of your ideology and says this is not working, listen to reality, not your ideology.
Right. And well, okay. Let me just highlight one more thing, and then we're actually almost at an hour, so I think we should start hitting some chats. I had mentioned about the theme that gets introduced in the French Revolution of attacking religious folks. You see this very strongly in the Soviet Union I know less about China. Well, I know some about it, but you see it very strongly in the Soviet Union. A detail that's always stuck in my head is the Black Mass, where they would force Christians, I guess particularly priests, to do essentially like a satanic version of the Lord's Supper, where the bread is feces and the wine is urine. They'd force them
Yes.
to consume this stuff. Um, so in Russia, many monks, nuns, and priests were executed. Um, these crimes are ones that kind of get shoved down the memory hole. That's part of the reason I want to highlight them, because basically our ruling elites are in sympathy with that kind of thing. I remember seeing a movie about the Spanish Revolution or Spanish Civil War, and it had a scene where a priest is killed, and it's portrayed sympathetically, like it was justifiable for them to kill this priest. He was resisting communism or whatever, so he had to be killed. And I watched this and I thought, wow, so here's a Hollywood film showing a priest being executed in a positive light. I was like, that's everything you need to know, you know?
Well, they didn't just execute them; they made them do some very barbaric things. So there's
Right.
I'm reading Gulag Archipelago at the moment. I'm just about near the end, and I'll give you a taste at some of the things, and this is just a drop of what he says. You know, forcing the interrogators would force themselves upon the nuns. They would have rooms where it would be the walls are lined with cork in the walls, so they would heat up the room to where they are sweating blood, or they would cool the room so that they are freezing and bits of themselves would fall off. And they would keep them up for just weeks and put them on a soft couch. And if they fell asleep, they would get a bullet in the head. They would drag priests by their beards or by their hair and make them renounce their faith or pretend like they could do miracles, and they would force them to say, "Oh, if your God, if very much like the sinner on the cross, if your God is real, why doesn't he save you?" As they would shoot them or throw them on a bed of nails. It's and that's just a tenth of what happened in that book. It's quite disgusting.
I didn't bring up the Gulag Archipelago, but I did read that, and it's not only teaches you about what happened under the Soviet Union, but again, it teaches you a pattern, a sequence. You see these things over and over again when the left gets in power. I wanted to
Well, there's
cover
an
this. Go
interesting
ahead.
story. Sorry, with the Gulag Archipelago. If you ever get around to reading it, they say it very clearly at the beginning, but I'd like to emphasize it here. All the names that you hear in the book, they were real people. Those aren't made up stories. They're not like they're not aliases.
Right.
Those are real people. Those are real people who really went through it, and those are their real names. And the second thing is that Tsar Alexander, I think it was the second, the one before Nicholas the Second. He wanted to experience what he was sending people through because as a good Christian man, he didn't want to do undue suffering to people. And the secret police of the Tsar were nowhere near as bad as the KGB, but basically when he went through to one of these cells, was about double the size of the confinement cells that the Soviets used to push people into. He wept because he thought what he was doing was immoral. And instead of torturing people, he would just send them off to Siberia because he didn't want to torture them. But at least he respected human life, unlike the communists, unlike the Soviets, because
Um,
he actually had some morals about him, I guess, even though he was a very harsh man.
right. Um, okay, so I'm gonna have to read some comments without putting them on the screen because I can see them in the YouTube chat, but I can't see them. The StreamYard chat seems to not go very far back. I did want to just say why this topic now. Well, you've got Chaz, you've got what some people are seeing as a push by Antifa and the Black Lives Matter organization, which itself is seems to be led by Marxists, or revolutionary leftists of some variety, and so it's worth reminding ourselves occasionally why opposing a leftist takeover, leftists actually being in control of the state apparatus, why it's really worth doing, because they really make a mess of things when they're in power. It's horrifying, and I would go so far as to say it's satanic. You story after story you read, and you're like, oh, this is more than just consolidating power. There's torture, and there's sadism, and there's the Marquis de Sade, as Knut Ladin said, Marquis de Sade should really be viewed as a central figure for the left. His sadism, his sexual perversion, and so forth. Okay, so let me highlight a few things. One person said we shouldn't refer to the French invention pictured in the chat. Oh, and then sellout satirist. I wanted to highlight him. He says you can refer to it as La Rassoir Nationale, which should get it past the censors. I don't know what that means. Makes me want to look it up. La Rassoir Nationale. Let's see.
I wish I had my friend here because he speaks fluent French, so he could tell us what that meant.
Somebody's asking about the deep lore and how do I get involved. I guess I need to get permission from the deep lore folks to share a link to an invite to Unpopular Academy as part of this, because this is not the first time someone's brought that up, and that's the entryway to get yourself over to the deep lore eventually. But Unpopular Academy itself is a place to be.
If you go to the channel Academic Agent, in the description of the videos there is a link to the Unpopular Academy. In future shows, we'll try and get a permission to share that link. But for now, just go to that channel and look for the link. Look for the description.
Especially since I use deep lore we use deep lore in the title. So
the National Razor. That is what that French word means, apparently.
The National Razor. Fun. Okay, let's see. Martian Pundit says Harding and Coolidge were the greatest presidents of the 20th century. Oh, this was fun. Little Twitter drama. I won't spend too much time on it. Right Honorable Fez says Per Byland slapped down Lord Keynes too neatly. Lord Keynes too, Academic Agent's old nemesis. So that's fun. The newly redubbed Nathan Hood, formerly known as Sue de Nem. Nathan Hood says Johnson did promise big infrastructure projects in his election manifesto. Now he has an excuse. Boris Johnson. Interesting. So he wanted to do it anyway. Win the North, right? By screwing them up with a bunch of government spending.
Are these older comments? Could we bring them up?
I'm still on comments that I don't think I can highlight yet.
Okay.
I'm trying to get. I'm working on ones that I can see in my YouTube window, but I can't highlight in StreamYard yet. Let's see. Yeah, it'll be nice when we do super chats because it does help. Because I think they don't scroll.
If we ever get monetized.
Yeah, I don't know. Lawrence Tim makes a suggestion, reading out loud so I remember for the future. Very good point. Can you put the link in the chat before you bring it up rather than after? That's a great point.
All right.
Yeah, Lumberg on the cash, the war on cash. No cash means the state knows your every move. That's right, and that's exactly why, even though for some people it might seem like a technical topic or sort of a geeky economics topic, I think we would find that with no cash, regular folks who really don't care about economic theory or anything would start to feel the pinch of not being able to escape from the state's observation.
And the thing is that the central planners need. The problem that we have is that, one, the use of force by the central planners to enact their will over the will of individuals within our society, because they think they know best. And two is that they just don't have really the right measures to even understand how the economy works in all of its detail. If we give them the ability to monitor what we purchase at all times, every stage of our life, then they will have more detail and be able to run our lives even more than what they are now. So it's a very big risk if we let a cashless society emerge.
Yep. Yes, the eunuch says we're definitely headed for a crash and civil war. I'm glad I moved to the mountains and have plenty of supplies, safety, and arsenal, and can grow my own food. So there's our local prepper.
Don't endorse that one, but okay.
Lux at Lux says touchless payments and online are super convenient, to be honest. That's how they get you. But you're right. It is convenient. Turnip Merchant says this digital currency isn't just traceable, it's completely inescapable. Trackable is an understatement.
Yes.
Raisin says, from a security perspective, any digital currency, even Bitcoin, will be inherently more dangerous than cash transactions. I guess he means from like I guess I would call it a privacy perspective, right? But you could still get tracked with a Bitcoin purchase, potentially. It's harder, but it can be done. Whereas with cash, it's pretty hard. Let's see. GL, have the name of the infrastructure bill that passed the House. I don't know which country.
Hold on. Where is it? I don't have the name to it, but I can send a link about an article to it.
Okay. Share that link, or yeah, I gave you the wrench so that you can do that stuff, right?
My internet is so horrible that if I open multiple tabs,
You get destroyed.
yes.
Okay. Well, I will share it if you put it in the private chat eventually. Here's one for you.
Don't nationalize your internet. That's my advice. Do not nationalize your internet.
Robin Watertree specifically addresses you, Mad Mark, and says, "This is what's called in an interview a softball question. What do you think of Peter Zeihan's dissertations? Supposedly, the U.S. Navy is going to stop protecting shipping lanes and upset the World War II global order."
That is a very softball question. I have been a fan of Zion's work for about half a decade now.
Is it
I've read all his books.
Zeihan?
Yeah, Zion. Peter Zion.
Okay. Zion. Okay, go ahead.
It's a Bulgarian name. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, I've been a fan of his work for a very long time. I agree with the majority of his analysis. I have a few qualms about some of the things he says, especially in relation to internal strife. I think he underplays that. But, 99% of what... Well, actually, no. 90% of what he says, I agree with. So, yes, I think the US is pulling out. And I think you're starting to see the consequences of that, like people starting to invest $270 billion more in their militaries, as we highlighted at the start of the show.
Yep.
Just for people's knowledge, Zion went over his political beliefs, and they are slightly libertarian, slightly to more to the right. But he's definitely not like our sort of total free market guy. He's more of a moderate.
Right. Jury Rigging asks, "What's the painting behind your head? I like it. Thank you. The painting I use as a background is a real painting, but I don't know really anything about it. It just, I got a bunch of stuff from a family recently and saw that it was the right shape. to be behind me when I'm doing video, so I grabbed it. And also, if I can get out of the way for just a moment, you can see that where my head is, there isn't very much in the painting. So it kind of works in that sense. The trees in the painting frame my head, you know, and I'm not really blocking much with my head. So anyway, kind of fun. Okay. What'd you say?
You woodsman.
Okay, now I'm back on. Let's see. Let's stop that. And I'm back in StreamYards. Yay. Okay, let's see. Yuri Bezmenov has been coming up regularly lately. Nathan Hood said, Bezmenov said something similar. Once ideological subversion is complete, you get rid of the destabilizer to establish a new stability. So you have your shock troops, ideological, physical shock troops, the brown shirts in the case of the Nazis, for example. And then there was the Night of the Long Knives, and that was the end of the power of the brown shirts, because now they were in power. They didn't want thugs, basically, you know. Let's see. Anabaptist, Turnip Merchant says, yes, the Munsters were Anabaptist. That's true. Rogers says that chapter was creepy as fuck. Idle Time says Munster was fascinating. Basically Chaz.
Yes.
We'll have to learn more about Chaz, but he may be on to something.
Well, speaking of the people who become the thing that they hate, there's a video of Chaz summarily executing a man in Chaz, the Chaz police.
Yep.
And there's video of it, and there's an altercation, there's shots fired, and then there's a break, and these guys are let out, and this guy says, do you want to get pistol whipped? And then you just hear 2 shots fired after this guy's yelled out, do you really want to get pistol whipped? And it's quite horrific that they just, you know, these people who are supposedly protesting police violence are now
right
summarily executing people.
Yeah, judge, jury, executioner. Rogers, continuing on Munster, Rogers says the cult leader tried to charge the army sieging Munster on his own. Didn't end well for him. That's true. That is covered by Rothbard in the article I shared. Then jumping forward to Robespierre and the useless eaters. Turnip Merchant says, I fix the death from overpopulation by causing the death.
Jump the gun.
Glow in the Dark said, War in the Vendée was some serious shit. It really was. What I've read about it, it's crazy. Now, this is interesting. Let's see. Turnip Merchant says, the American South experienced a similar trend after the March to the Sea and the dissolution of the plantations in the Civil War. Yeah, that's an interesting case. Some folks like me would see Lincoln as a sort of a left-wing nationalist or something like that.
Something, you know, one might say national socialist. Oh, wait, that term's already used. Sorry, my mistake.
He wasn't good on economics, that's for sure. Yeah, Robin Watertree says massacres are demand-side economics. Let's see here. Jean-Paul Marat, we got that name right. Turnip Merchant says Cult of Reason is one of my favorite topics. Lots to learn about that. A lot to learn from that. Yep.
And Chaz and Chop are invoking the French Revolution.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. How did I forget?
Yes.
They said, what happened to the people who resisted the French Revolution? Chopped.
They got chopped.
Yeah. Whoo. Okay. Pretty spicy, guys. Right Honorable Fez says Napoleon was expansionary, but preferable to the Reign of Terror. For the
Very preferable
for the French.
Yes. Well, stability is above all, right? Especially just for the average person. They want a stable and secure existence.
Oh, this is interesting. Somebody asked Turnip Merchant for sources on the war between the states here in the United States. He says, as a primer to get into it, there's a large Ken Burns documentary that I quite like. He did a good job on highlighting the cross-side atrocities. Interesting. I'm sorry, Nathan Hood, but I'm going to skip the Palpatine stuff for this stream, as much fun as it is.
I am the Senate.
Yeah, so jury rigging, I'm trying to remember. I think he's talking about the French Revolution. Food went to 30% of income during the revolution, didn't it? Bread prices led to the Women's March, if I recall. Interesting.
Yes.
That sounds right. Okay. Yeah, the food price. Yeah, it was becoming a real problem. Yeah. Oh, that's a pattern that's worth mentioning about the left in power. It seems to often, always, close to always, be associated with famine. There's the famine that was really purposefully engineered. There's evidence for that now in the book called Bloodlands, purposefully engineered in the Ukraine. But other famines happen just because they actually try to put their crazy economic ideas into practice, and then it breaks the system down. People start dying.
Right. This is what I'm talking about with reality.
Yeah, Mad Merc.
With reality and ideology coming together.
But yeah, and I remember years later, I'm a kid and I'm seeing this stuff about the people dying in Ethiopia from famine. And isn't this sad? We need to send money. We need to help them. And then later I felt a little betrayed or manipulated because I was like, wait a second, after I'm learning about politics and stuff, that's because they were socialists and they were, they didn't mention that the Ethiopians said it was another socialist famine, that was happening when I was a kid. Okay, Turnip Merchant says the continental system is also what brought Napoleon to war in the Iberian Peninsula and Russia. Both opposed the system and facilitated smuggling. And so
correct. So the Russians were so the Portuguese. I've done a lot of reading about the Iberian Peninsula Wars because it's quite fascinating, the guerrilla tactics that the Spanish used. But the Russians continued to trade from St. Petersburg to the United Kingdom because it was the only thing really keeping their economy afloat. And the Portuguese, being strong allies of the British, never stopped. And so the French marched down to Spain and said that we're your friends and don't worry, this is totally not an invasion. Went to Portugal and killed everyone in Lisbon, and then marched back to Madrid. The son and the king of Spain were in a dispute as to who should rule. There were two factions. Napoleon screwed them both over and put his brother Jerome on the throne.
Right.
And basically, both sides then, even though they hated each other, hated the French more, and started a guerrilla war.
And somewhere in the middle of all this, the place that I am sitting right now got sold to the United States under President Jefferson.
But yes, it
was owned by the French, and then the Spanish, and then the French were in control, and then they sold it to us, something like that. The famous Louisiana Purchase was in the middle of all that.
Correct, and then Napoleon marched off to Russia, as famously, and was with his Grand Armée, and tried to take out the Russian Tsar because he wouldn't adhere to he didn't adhere to the continental system. It's the strangest form of diplomacy I've ever known, where you go to war with someone to try and make them your ally.
Right. Turner Merchant says something that's also not talked about in the French Revolution is that the monarchy was starting to lean towards the free market with Jacques Necker, who is, I assume, the minister or whatever, finance minister or something like that. I feel like I heard
something. The bubble burst.
That's interesting. And then
nobody likes French.
And then Turner Merchant says then they got ousted, so they were kind of heading in a certain direction, and then here comes the leftists or the Illuminati, as someone was explaining in a video about the French Revolution. But I haven't tended to focus on that aspect of it. Okay. Let's see. There's a lot to do with pure reaction against the monarch liberalizing his finances, and I would love to continue with it. So yeah, there's a whole history there of what led up to the French Revolution, and a gazillion books have been written on it.
we can continue discussing that in the deep lore, where we
That's
always continue the discussion.
Okay. Somebody just bought the Black Book of Communism.
Well done.
Okay. Jury rigging's mad because I laughed off Rhodesia as opposed to calling it Zimbabwe.
It is Rhodesia,
I
a
don't
land that's
history.
home and great.
I don't know the history well enough. Let's see. Current commenter. Cutting taxes does wonders for public order and growth of the economy, and taxes in the long run. Trade is also very profitable. Yeah.
No contrapoint here.
When we ask the government to do something, for some reason, do something doesn't seem to mean get out of the way, cut regulation. Trump was talking that way when he took office, by the way. But anyway. Yeah, the Khmer Rouge. I forgot the term of Pol Pot's crew, the Khmer Rouge. I couldn't get it in my head. Thank you, Lundberg.
Mostly boys not over the age of 15 in the Khmer Rouge, by the way.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Most of the people in the Khmer Rouge were not over the age of 15. They were all young boys, mostly at the age of 12.
Wow, that's crazy. Gawain Gaming says genocide is killing of a specific ethnic group. Democide is killing of citizens by, their own state, by their own country. Let's see. Then they talk about training people who go off to do horrible things. Let's see. Ashra Gunn says, I honestly believe the mass immigration into our countries is to have a foreign army to rule over the indigenous populace. It wouldn't be the first something like that happened. I'm thinking of the Vandals in Rome, that sort of thing.
I have a few questions about that statement, but I understand the sentiment.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Turnip Merchant. Oklahoma has a lot of Cambodians that fled from the Khmer Rouge. A lot of them have stories that are terrifying to hear.
Yes. We have a fair few when the North Vietnamese broke the treaty after the Vietnam War and invaded the South. Many Vietnamese were offered refugee status in Australia, and if you just listen to some of their stories, it's quite horrific.
Yeah. Yeah, I work with some Huens. That's like the Vietnamese version of Smith or Jones. Some Huens are coworkers of mine. Lawrence Tim says AA has just bought some French cooking books. Next, he'll be demolishing a small country.
Or invading Algiers.
Lawrence says, why wouldn't they just take out the leader? Surely when you killed 8% of the population, they would get pissed off.
Because ideology.
I hate this. Sorry, this will jump to the bottom suddenly for some reason.
It's all right.
Place. Okay, here we go. Almost there. Idle Time says Christianity is a bulwark against communism or leftism. That's why they want to destroy it. It provides a powerful, positive moral framework that contests the moral framework of the left. Yeah, now, I guess that's tended to kind of be my view. I have to say it's quite interesting to see people on the far right who don't have that view, and they view Christianity as like a left-wing phenomenon or something. And Christianity is what leads to these things, which is kind of true in a way, in this sense, that communism seems to be I've seen writers refer to it as a Christian heresy. It's the idea of the millennium. It's just without Jesus and with a lot of socialism in it. But basically, it's millenarian. It's right. We're gonna bring a new age, and it's gonna be great, and we're gonna all be brothers. It's just we don't need the Holy Spirit or Jesus to be involved. We're just gonna, force it to happen.
It's Christianity without God, and without a second life, without the afterlife. It's trying to create heaven on earth.
We got to make it, the immanentization of the eschatological, and the wonderful phrase of one guy.
See, I would counter that from Idle Time, and I would say, you have left-wing Christianity what are the Catholics called? Not the Jesuits. The someone in chat has it. The South American school that the Pope is from. I forget the name of it, unfortunately, but that's a very left-wing form of Christianity. So I don't think saying Christianity is the bulwark against left communism and leftism, although it can be. It can also be co-opted.
Exactly, and Antonio Gramsci saw that the church and the family and other kinds of institutions were needed to be taken over by the left, and so that's why they did the Long March through the institutions in the post-World War II era, in particular.
Right.
That's why we now associate the universities, for example, with left-wingism. Even a lot of the churches, like the Pope, little figures like that, religious figures like that, are now clearly Marxist adjacent in some sense. That's no accident.
Right.
Gramsci
I
said,
just thought of sorry, I just thought of the term. It's liberation theology.
Liberation theology. That's right. Yeah, and that's
Yes.
really a Gramscian triumph that they did that. Paul says, "Hi, Radlib. This is my first stream I'm watching of you, and I'm absolutely loving it. Great. You touched on how revolution is bad and referenced the article, Revolutions Eat Their Parents. I agree with your sentiment here, but I do wonder what your thought on a revolution in Hong Kong. I do not see a peaceful resolution of the problem they have with the Chinese Communist Party and its reign over China." Yeah, I was just sharing revisionist stuff, but I probably need to dig deeper. I don't know. I visited Hong Kong, by the way, several times, and I like it quite a bit. So this is a topic of interest to me, and I have coworkers and friends there. And I'm quite concerned. I would say that one big thought that's come to me is, if I was Hong Kong, I would not be thumbing my nose at China. That just seems like a bad decision, which is probably not going to have good outcomes. But I don't know. I think it sort of remains to be seen. I don't have the view of China that a lot of my centrist moderate friends have. They seem to view China as basically still under the control of Mao or something like that. That is, they essentially view it as in strong continuity with the really communist period. And I don't really think that's the right way to understand China. I'm not saying they're nice people or anything, but just to see them as they're just continuing to do what Mao was doing, I think that kind of misses some essential history of the last 40 years. China has changed quite a bit. You could still view it as a threat in various ways, and we can debate it sometime. But I would say that I don't think that, say, China is going to take over Hong Kong and put a guillotine in the square and start, executing half the population or something like that. I'm not saying they're going to be nice, and I wish Hong Kong and China were getting along better, but I just don't really think that that's what China is anymore. They're not going to do a cultural revolution or something crazy like that. I don't think that's just not what they're up to anymore. They just want to be in power and grow their economy or something at this point. They're like authoritarian capitalists or something. I don't know.
Paul, I would recommend Disunited Nations by Peter Zion.
You focus
in there, right? If you want to read more about this sort of stuff. But I differ from Radlib's opinion here, but I won't go into it because we're running out of time.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I'd like to learn more. So let's see. Discord talk. Yeah, this is interesting. Boris's New Deal seems half-baked and counterproductive. It's a herd of baby white elephants. That's an interesting metaphor.
I'm not even sure if I get that. It's a herd of baby white elephants.
Yeah, I got to think about that one. Zizek, I don't know anything. I know the name. He's a left-wing philosopher or something. I don't know. But
Marxist professor. I haven't seen much of his stuff, unfortunately.
Marcher Devil says there's Priv and Ghost tokens from John McAfee, I guess, that are looking to make far more private transactions than regular cryptocurrencies. Interesting. Let's see. Radlib, this is my first stream and I have subscribed. You're very knowledgeable. Here's my question. What do you think about Jews? Google Barbara Lerner Spectre if you need to. I know a lot about Jewish people. My father was a missionary to Jewish people, and I grew up around Jewish people, some of whom accepted Jesus and became Jewish Christians or Messianic Jews, and some of whom didn't. And I don't know how I could answer that question exactly. I know a lot. I could I could do many streams on the topic. Messianism in Jewish history and Shabbatai Tzvi, and of course the role of, to our topic today, the role of Jews with the Bolsheviks and things like that. There's many things to say. Turnip Merchant says,
welcome to the stream, by the way. Welcome to your first stream.
Right.
Hope you're enjoying it.
Turnip Merchant, Lincoln was a mass murderer Marxist.
That's a bit harsh.
Lincoln was literally a Marx fanboy. Actually, that's true. They exchanged letters. I couldn't believe it when I.
Well, what was the content of the letters? Because Hayek and Keynes exchanged letters, so I wouldn't say Hayek is Keynes
no,
fanboy.
it wasn't that kind of thing. It was, yeah. Anyway, Marx was a foreign correspondent for a New York paper, and Lincoln read him regularly, and then they actually exchanged some letters. Anyway, strange occurrence in history. And these people were contemporaries, right? Let's see, Going Gaming. That's what you were talking about earlier, promoting on basis of ideological purity rather than merit. Killing your productive population makes your production reduce, cause starvation. Let's see. Paul says, hey, I'm from Louisiana. I know a fair bit about the Louisiana Purchase. Yeah, we learned a lot about in Missouri as well, because we were part of our territory here was part of that purchase. Let's see. Being mean about the French. Let's see. Yeah, Robin Watertree, liberation theology is a form of Marxist thought presented in Christian terms. Yeah, it's just Marxism as far as I can tell. There's not much more to it. It's just dressed up in Christian speak, but it's not driven by it's not driven by what I would think of as traditional spiritual Christian concerns. It's driven by Marxist revolutionary concerns, and Christian concerns draped around the core of it, which is really about revolution.
Right, and I think what they miss is that, be in the world but not of the world. They are of the world. Most of their concerns are of the world.
That's an excellent way of coming at it, Mad Merc. I agree. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. Speaking of Hong Kong, I heard Boris is offering citizenship to 3 million Hong Kongers if they live in the UK for 5 years. This is the immigration I'm looking for. Yeah, that's been fun to watch the centrists versus the far right on offering citizenship to the Hong Kongers. I've been involved in that a little bit. Let's see. Oh yeah, Paul explains, a white elephant is a government project that essentially serves as a cover for corruption. And he's calling them baby white. Okay. He's derisively calling them baby white elephants, which I thought was pretty funny.
Okay.
And he goes on, the cost is massively out of scale with the usefulness, right? And then someone says, isn't Radlib Jewish? And someone else says Radlib is Christian. I am not ethnically Jewish nor religiously Jewish. My father was a missionary to Jews. So I grew up around a lot of Jewish things, and I know some Hebrew, and my family actually blesses the challah in Hebrew and then in English to begin our Sabbath dinner on Friday nights. So it's part of my life. Let's see. Okay, I think we're almost there. Okay, here we go. It is true that Lincoln and Marx exchanged letters. However, to call Lincoln a Marxist is to completely misunderstand both of their ideologies. Their agreement on slavery was their main thing. Ah, interesting.
I thought that might be a little bit uncharitable to call him.
I mean,
Marxist mass murderer.
Lincoln is a big problem in my view, and he is the real founder of the current regime of the United States. I view him as a revolutionary who upended the previous order, which did have secession as a potential check. New England had threatened secession early on in the 1800s because they were upset with what the central government was doing, and it was a check on the central government that if it acted badly enough, the states could leave. Well, Lincoln changed all that and much else and he was a lawyer to the railroads, and he basically was a pro-business guy, shall we say, and I mean that in the worst possible way. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much. There's so much more that could be said about the left in power. I wasn't very focused on economics per se, but obviously an aspect of the left is their economic vision. I would recommend to you, if you're interested in really understanding this topic, Rothbard on Marx, and he starts it in a funny way, and he says, the thing you have to understand about Marx is that he was a communist. He says, I know, you're going to be like, that's your deep insight? He says, no, but you have to understand, Marx was a communist before he knew anything about economics. He was already a committed communist. And once Rothbard brings you back to the young Marx, who was scary, read his poetry, talking about how I am Satan, I am become Satan or something, I don't know. Anyway, he takes you back to the young Marx, and he says, before we even get into the economics of Marx, understand that Marx already had an ideological commitment to communism. And then that helps you understand how he's coming at economics and much else. So that's kind of why this stream was a little bit less econ heavy, because though obviously socialism is a doctrine of economics and communism is meant to be the final state of socialism or whatever, I don't think that that is the whole story. And that's why the things we stressed, I think, are the right things to stress. The chaos, the terror, the anti-Christianity in particular, but other religions got the bullet too. Anti-religiousness, but anti-Christianity above all of communism. And then, of course, the inevitable collapse into dictatorship and just terror and murder. That is the real story about it. And every time people talk to you about how idealistic they are as leftists and how they just want brotherhood, and you should start hitting them with the Black Book of Communism or something like that. That's my view.
Perhaps we'll do a stream on it. But Marx was truly a very detestable human, putting it past his politics.
Yeah, just in his personal life and with how he dealt with the women and children in his life and stuff. Yeah, agreed.
Not a good person.
Not an admirable person. Okay, well, thanks everybody. A little bit longer than normal this week, but not long for YouTube streams, I guess. But man, we covered a lot, and I really enjoyed. I hope you guys did too. Even though the meat of our stream was not so economic. The beginning was a lot of, the two of us gave you a lot of leads on stuff you can dig into and links you can read. So you've got 2 weeks till the next show, and plenty to learn if you'd like to. And we do take suggestions, by the way, in particular in the Deep Lore, if you're in there. We have a channel for this show, and we take suggestions in there for show topics, and they're appreciated. I've been feeling like being sort of current events related. Believe it or not, I meant this to be sort of a current event show in a sense, because we have radical leftists trying to seize power, I think. But, we don't have to be. And I think there's plenty of topics that are of interest that maybe aren't the hot thing in the news. We haven't dealt with cryptocurrencies particularly. We wouldn't do it just the two of us. We'd get a guest to cover a topic like that. So that, by the way, just to give you ideas here. Ideas for topics are welcome, and ideas for guests. And of course, guests sort of suggest topics because guests usually have a specialty or something like that. So guest ideas and topic ideas are most certainly welcome.
Please write those in the comments below. Or if you're in the Deep Lore, write them in the recommended space, which is the Deep Lore Radical Liberation Econ Show chat.
Radlib's Econ. It's called
Radlib's Econ Hour. If you are on the special area, also we have the channel there, so go write your suggestions in there as well. I don't know whether I'm allowed to reveal that yet, but
the place we shall not name.
We shall not name.
See
if you're in there as well,
especially if Discord shuts us down again.
Right. Remembering, if you want the link to the Unpopular Academy, which is the Discord server for the entrance into the deep lore, go to Academic Agent's channel and look in the description of one of his videos. Should be there. And have a good day.
All right. Bye, everybody.